On May 1973, 8 divers dove into the shaft, a mysterious sinkhole in Australia, eager for adventure. What started as an exciting exploration quickly spiraled into chaos. Deep in the water's depths, the group faced darkness, confusion, and a series of deadly mistakes. This dive would become one of the most tragic events in cave diving history, leaving behind haunting questions and lessons for future explorers. South Australia has an interesting population setup. The largest city, Adelaide, has over 1 million people, but the second largest city, Mount Gambier, has only 33,000. That's a massive gap, with Mount Gambier being more than 40 times smaller than Adelaide. In fact, the population of Adelaide is bigger than all the other cities in the state combined. It's surprising to think about how small Mount Gambier is, despite being the second largest city. Even though it's small, Mount Gambier plays a big role in the Limestone Coast region. It's located right near the border of South Australia and Victoria, just a few kilometers from the southern coast. The city is built on the slopes of a volcano, also called Mount Gambier. This area is famous for its volcanic features, like limestone landscapes, crystal clear lakes, caves, and sinkholes. Just outside the city, you'll find farm fields stretching all the way to the southern coast. One of these fields is called Thompson's Paddock. It's a small 5-acre piece of land owned by dairy farmers. In 1938, something strange happened in Thompson's Paddock. A farmer was working in the field with some equipment pulled by horses. As the horses moved across the grass, one of them tripped over something hidden. The farmer found this odd and decided to check it out. He stopped the horses, climbed down, and walked over to where the horse had stumbled. What he saw surprised him. There was a hole in the ground, about a foot wide. He had never noticed it before. It was just there, hidden in the grass. He knelt down to look into the hole and was shocked to see it extended about 20 feet down, and at the bottom, there was water. This discovery was both amazing and creepy, but it was just the start. It's not clear how long the farmer had been working this field or why he hadn't noticed the hole before. We also don't know if the horse caused the hole to appear or if it had always been there, unnoticed. Either way, if the horse caused the hole to open up, could it collapse even further? Was the ground around the hole at risk of caving in? To make things worse, the farmer could see that the hole's narrow opening stretched for maybe 2 or 3 feet, but after that, the sides weren't visible. It looked like it widened out, like an upside-down funnel. In the worst-case scenario, imagine someone walking in the field and stepping into the hole. They would fall 20 feet into the water below. Because of the hole's shape, there would be no way to climb back out. All they could do would be to tread water and scream for help. This discovery made the farmer worried, so he decided to try to fill the hole with rocks. Over the next few days, he brought soccer ball-sized stones and started dropping them into the hole. One by one, the rocks would make a big splash and disappear into the dark water below, never to be seen again. The farmer dumped the first dozen rocks into the hole, and they just kept disappearing. Then, he dropped several dozen more into the hole. The dozens of rocks turned into hundreds, then into 1,000, and still, none of them could be seen at the bottom. After trying for a while, they gave up. The rocks seemed to vanish into the hole, as though the hole was bottomless. The farmer then had to be careful around the opening and hope it wouldn't collapse more. Soon, news spread about the strange hole, and people started coming to see it for themselves. It was later discovered that the hole was a limestone sinkhole, where water had slowly dissolved the rocks underneath, creating a large opening just a few feet below the surface. The hole, originally just a foot wide, was widened to about 3 feet or 1 meter, so it could be explored more easily. In the mid-1960s, a diver was the first person to go into the cave. He was lowered 23 feet, or 7 meters down into the opening, where he touched the water's surface. What he saw was surprising. It wasn't just a small hole, but a small lake. Right beneath the entrance, the space was narrow, but by the time he reached the water's surface, the room was 56 feet or 17 meters wide. On a sunny day, at noon, sunlight would shine through the opening and create a blue beam of light that lit up the room and the water. Because of this shaft of light, the cave became known as the Shaft. The diver then began scuba diving into the cave, and as he went deeper, the cave just kept getting wider. On his first dive, he went down to about 69 feet or 21 meters before deciding to turn back. The most surprising part was when he looked down from where he stopped. He could see all the rocks that had been thrown into the cave years before. The hundreds of rocks looked like a little anthill at the bottom, and they were still about 50 feet, which is about 15 meters below where he stopped. The cave was later mapped to show a massive chamber where the rocks were, along with 2 very deep arms that went in almost opposite directions. The main chamber was 460 feet long, about 140 meters, and 260 feet, about 79 meters wide at its widest point. The rock pile was located 118 feet, about 36 meters below the surface. From there, a tunnel stretched northwest to a depth of 260 feet, about 80 meters, and on the other side, another tunnel led all the way to 407 feet, about 124 meters of depth. These tunnels were believed to be connected to the freshwater drainage system running through the mountains in the area. Along the tunnels were cliffs, overhangs, and obstacles that made exploring more interesting. The clear water and the size of the cave made it a dream for cavers. However, an accurate map of the cave wasn't made until 1984. By the 1970s, though, more than 8,000 dives had already been done inside the shaft. Even though so many dives had taken place, the cave's full depth wasn't known, and no complete map had been made. The cave was considered bottomless. Due to the newness of cave diving and the limited equipment available at the time, divers could only go as far as the charts showed and then look into the unknown. They were left wondering how deep the cave really went. In May of 1973, a team of 9 divers came together to make what they hoped would be a record dive into the shaft. They arrived in Mount Gambier on the 26th and set up tents at a campground near the famous Blue Crater Lake. Their goal was to reach the edge of the perimeter at 250 feet, about 76 meters deep. The perimeter was the point where the light from above no longer reached. Beyond this, the water turned almost completely black. This area was near a spot known as the drop-off. This point in the cave was where the bottom became invisible from above. That's why the shaft was thought to be bottomless. From the ledge, you could look down and see nothing, even though it clearly went much deeper. All 9 divers in the group were dive instructors, but since this was a challenging mission, they decided to do a practice dive first and set up some equipment before their main attempt. On the next day, the 27th, they went to the farmhouse at Thompson's paddock, signed the guest book, and then drove to the grassy field where the entrance to the sinkhole was located. They parked by the opening and set up a tripod hoist system, which many people are probably familiar with. This hoist is used to lower divers into the water below. Even though the hole had been widened, it was still too narrow for divers to be lowered in with their full equipment. The equipment had to be lowered separately. To help them get out, a wire ladder was set up for the divers to climb. Once everyone was in the water, they were amazed at how big the space already seemed right at the surface. The team began their day by setting up a shot line, a crucial piece of equipment for the dive. This was a weighted line that went from the surface straight down to the rock pile. The shot line would help guide their descent during the record attempt and make it easier to reach their goal. On this practice dive, the divers didn't go very deep, only about 200 feet, staying close to the rock pile. This depth was within the range where sunlight still filtered through the cave's opening, making the area relatively well lit. While at this depth, they could see the edge they planned to explore. It was a mysterious boundary where the cave floor seemed to disappear into the unknown. After finishing their dive and getting a better feel for the cave's layout, they returned to Mount Gambier to recharge their lights and refill their air tanks. They knew tomorrow would be the big day. On the following day, 8 of the 9 divers suited up for the dive. Joan, one of the divers, decided to stay behind and help on the surface. She prepared food and helped manage supplies while the others prepared to enter the cave. The divers heading into the water were Robert, John, Peter, Gordon, Larry, and 3 siblings, Glenn, Stephen, and Christine. The team descended into the water, reaching the rock pile at 130 feet before heading toward the tunnel that led to the ledge. As they reached about 180 feet, Robert began to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis. This condition occurs when nitrogen in the air dissolves into the blood at high pressure, causing an impaired, almost drunken sensation. For Robert, the narcosis came earlier than expected, but it was strong enough that he decided to ascend slightly to reduce the symptoms. He signaled the others that he was heading back to the rock pile, and they signaled that they would continue without him. Robert swam around the rock pile, exploring and searching for anything interesting, like animal bones that might have sunk to the bottom. About 8 minutes later, he spotted Glenn's flashlight coming toward him. By this time, Robert's air was running low, and so was Glenn's, who had been keeping an eye on his gauges. The 2 divers surfaced together, relieved to be back above water. Shortly after, Larry also surfaced, followed by Peter about 30 seconds later. Peter had almost no air left, and reported that he hadn't seen any of the other divers. As the group on the surface started piecing together what had happened, they felt a sinking dread. Glenn was especially worried. His brother and sister, Stephen and Christine, were still underwater, likely running out of air. The minutes ticked by, and panic began to set in. Earlier, while the group continued their dive without Robert, they swam along a ledge at around 200 feet. The divers were taking pictures and exploring the area. Glenn noticed his sister Christine swimming just a few feet away from him. Everything seemed fine at first. The sunlight above still provided some visibility, and only about 5 minutes had passed since they started their descent. Glenn started feeling groggy from the effects of narcosis. Realizing he had reached his limit, he decided it was time to head back up. Checking his gauges, he saw that his air supply was getting dangerously low. He knew that if he was running out, the others probably were too. Before ascending, he turned to signal Christine to follow him. As he reached out to tap her shoulder, she suddenly kicked her fins and swam away, just out of his reach. Christine's unexpected movement left Glenn stunned. He couldn't understand why she was moving away from him. With his air running out and the effects of narcosis clouding his judgment, he decided to head to the surface alone. He hoped Christine and the others would follow soon after. Back on the surface, the remaining divers anxiously waited, scanning the water for any signs of the others. Time dragged on, and their worry grew heavier. They knew the dangers of diving at such depths, especially without proper equipment or training. The lack of visibility and the effects of narcosis made the situation even more precarious. The dive had started with careful planning and high hopes, but now, uncertainty and fear took over. The weight of what might have happened to their friends underwater hung heavily in the air. Each passing moment felt like an eternity as they held on to a faint hope that the others would resurface safely. Glenn decided it was time to surface. He thought the others would follow soon, so he started swimming upwards. On the way, he met Robert, and they surfaced together. Around this time, chaos erupted in the cave. A mix of problems turned this into one of the deadliest cave diving accidents ever recorded. Just before Glenn began ascending, Peter felt the effects of narcosis worsening. He wanted to check Glenn's depth gauge, but Glenn had already started heading up. Left alone, Peter scanned the area. He saw 2 divers heading toward the exit. When he checked his air supply, he realized time was running out. He turned toward what he thought was the exit, but noticed something terrifying. The cave had become nearly pitch dark. He couldn't see the way out. Not long after the divers entered the cave, clouds covered the area, blocking much of the light that normally filtered in. Peter swam around, trying to locate the exit, but things got worse. The bottom of the cave was stirred up, and the water became murky with silt. Visibility dropped drastically, and the divers were scattered. In the deepest part of the cave, 3 divers were grouped together. Christine led the way, followed by Gordon, with Larry at the back. Larry and Gordon checked their air gauges and saw they were dangerously low. Panic set in. They signaled that it was time to ascend, but instead of moving diagonally toward the exit, they swam almost straight up. The structure of the cave added to the confusion. In limestone caves, pockets in the ceiling can form from rock breaking away. These pockets can trap air exhaled by divers, creating a mirror-like reflection. To the divers, it looked like the surface of the water near the entrance. Their flashlights bounced off this illusion. Disoriented, Gordon and Christine thought they were heading in the right direction. They swam directly up, hitting the cave ceiling. Frantically, they shone their flashlights around, hoping to find the exit. At that moment, Larry's light went out. He drifted downward for a moment, and when his light came back on, he spotted another diver in the distance. From this new angle, Larry saw the real entrance far ahead. He made a desperate swim for it and surfaced, just as Glenn and Robert did. Peter also managed to escape the murky water and surfaced shortly after Larry. Relief was short-lived. 4 divers were still missing, including Glenn's brother and sister. Desperate to find them, Glenn grabbed a spare air tank and dove back down. He reached the edge of a cliff at 225 feet, about 68.5 meters. There, he found his brother's flashlight and camera lying on the bottom. He tried to look further, but the water beyond was so full of silt that visibility was 0. Determined, Glenn went over the drop-off into the silt. As soon as he entered, he couldn't even see his own hand in front of his face. Panic gripped him. He quickly swam back to the rock pile's edge and waited, staring into the darkness, hoping for any sign of movement. After a while, he realized there was nothing more he could do and returned to the surface. Peter dove down after Glenn but also found nothing. By the time Peter resurfaced, an ambulance had arrived. The realization hit everyone that the missing divers were likely gone. Soon, the police arrived and planned a recovery operation for the following day. The next day, police divers descended into the cave, reaching 200 feet. However, the water was still clouded with silt, and they couldn't locate any bodies. They made a second attempt the day after, but still had no success. The depth of the recovery was unprecedented, pushing the limits of their training. The police halted the search until they could get more training, which would take months. In January the following year, the bodies had still not been recovered. A film crew making a cave diving documentary got permission from the landowners to film inside the cave. On January 22nd, they descended to a depth of 50 feet, with professional lighting equipment that lit up the cave as bright as daylight. While setting up, one of the technicians noticed what appeared to be a third person behind two of his teammates. Nervous, they investigated and found a body in a wetsuit. They immediately stopped filming and surfaced to notify the police. The next day, the police recovered the body, which was stuck under a ledge just 50 feet deep. Later, it was determined that the recovered body was Stephen, one of the siblings. In March of that year, the landowners became increasingly uneasy about the remaining bodies still being inside the cave. They sought help from a team of experienced divers with better equipment. On March 9, 1974, the team of divers began a new search. At 185 feet, they discovered another body lying on the bottom. They found another person directly below them during the search. Then, just 20 feet deeper, they discovered the final body. It was John, wedged beneath a rock ledge. Recovering his body was no easy task. Because of the depth and the way he was stuck, it took until April, a whole month later, for John's body to be retrieved. Nearly a year earlier, on that tragic day, something horrifying is believed to have happened. Christine and Gordon likely ran out of air while trapped in a dome-shaped pocket near the ceiling of the cave. With no way out and nothing they could do, it's thought they died holding onto each other. That's why their bodies were found so close together. There's a haunting account from one of the survivors about John. Someone had seen another diver swimming strongly, but deeper into the cave, while everyone else was heading toward the surface. That diver is believed to have been John. His actions seemed unusual, but it's likely he was heavily affected by nitrogen narcosis. This condition can disorient divers and impair their judgment, which could explain why John was heading deeper instead of trying to escape. Not much is known about Stephen's last moments. His body was found higher up compared to the others, near the ceiling rather than at the bottom. When he was discovered, his buoyancy device was inflated. This device made him float and kept him pressed against the roof of the cave. It's possible that Stephen tried to find his way out by following the ceiling in the dark, hoping to crawl along it toward the exit. Sadly, he must have run out of air before he could escape. No one saw what happened to him, so his final moments remain a mystery. This accident is considered the worst cave diving disaster in history. In the years before this tragedy, there were already several fatal incidents in nearby sinkholes around the Mount Gambier area. The shaft disaster, however, was the breaking point. It pushed people to take action. In response, the Cave Divers Association of Australia was created. Its main goal was to regulate cave diving and prevent similar tragedies from happening again. Looking back, it's clear the divers made some critical mistakes. They shouldn't have entered the cave without specific training and knowledge about cave diving. Today, it's easy to say they should have used specialized gas mixtures instead of regular air. But back then, those gas mixtures weren't widely available. Even more importantly, they should have used guidelines to mark their path through the cave. These lines are essential for navigating when visibility drops or the area becomes dark and silted. Interestingly, the divers were aware that guidelines were necessary. However, because of the size of their group, they decided not to use them. They feared the lines would get tangled, which could create an even bigger danger. In hindsight, they should have formed a smaller group. With fewer people, using guidelines would have been safer and more practical. The creation of the CDAA and other organizations like it brought major changes to cave diving. These groups established strict rules and guidelines for divers to follow. Since then, the number of cave diving deaths has significantly decreased. Today, divers are trained to avoid the mistakes made during the shaft disaster. That day remains a grim reminder of the risks involved in exploring underwater caves. The divers likely entered the cave with excitement and curiosity, unaware of the dangers they would face. They couldn't have predicted the series of events that led to their fate. Despite the tragedy, the lessons learned from this disaster have saved countless lives. The changes in safety practices, training, and regulations have made cave diving much safer for future explorers. It's a harsh reality that sometimes progress comes at the cost of lives. The shaft disaster left an indelible mark on the diving community. Families and friends of the victims were left with heartbreaking losses. For the survivors, the memory of that day likely haunts them. They carry the weight of what happened and the lives that were lost. The rescue and recovery efforts also highlighted the limitations of technology and training at the time. The police divers and other recovery teams faced challenges they weren't fully prepared for. The depth of the cave and the conditions inside pushed their skills and equipment to the limit. It's a testament to how far diving technology and training have come since then. Today, caves like the shaft are approached with extreme caution. Divers are required to have proper training, certification, and equipment before entering such dangerous environments. The importance of guidelines, backup plans, and understanding the risks cannot be overstated. The survivors of the shaft disaster serve as a reminder of both the resilience and vulnerability of human life. They escaped against incredible odds, but their stories also shed light on the mistakes and missteps that contributed to the tragedy. The shaft remains a somber place, a silent witness to the events of that day. For those who lost their lives, it stands as a memorial. For the diving community, it's a powerful lesson about the importance of preparation, caution, and respect for the unknown. What happens when a diving legend pushes the limits of human endurance in one of the world's deepest sinkholes? On April 6, 1994, Sheck Exley's quest for a world record turned into a terrifying mystery that still haunts the diving community today. The Zacaton sinkhole in Mexico is no ordinary dive site. Known as the deepest water-filled sinkhole on Earth, it plunges over 1,000 feet into the abyss, its depths shrouded in darkness and mystery. For Sheck Exley, a man who had spent his life chasing the extremes of underwater exploration, Zacaton was the ultimate challenge. But on that fateful day in 1994, the sinkhole would claim his life, leaving behind questions that may never be fully answered. Sheck Exley's journey into the world of diving began not in the depths of a sinkhole or the darkness of an underwater cave, but in the warm, sunlit waters of Florida. Born on April 1, 1949, in Jacksonville, Sheck grew up in a state known for its natural springs, crystal-clear rivers, and abundant underwater ecosystems. From an early age, he was drawn to the water, a fascination that would eventually define his life. Sheck's love for diving was ignited during his teenage years, a time when most kids are more interested in cars, sports, or socializing. But for Sheck, the allure of the underwater world was irresistible. He and his younger brother Edward spent countless hours exploring the springs and rivers near their home. Wakulla Springs, located about 14 miles south of Tallahassee, was one of their favorite spots. Known for its deep, clear waters and underwater caves, it was the perfect playground for two adventurous brothers. The Exley brothers weren't just casual swimmers. Even as teenagers, they were pushing the limits of what was possible in the water. Free diving, diving without the use of scuba gear, became their specialty. They would take turns seeing how deep they could go on a single breath, a game that quickly turned into a competition. Sheck, in particular, seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to hold his breath and withstand the pressures of deep water. It was during one of these free-diving sessions at Wakulla Springs that tragedy struck, an event that would shape Sheck's life and career in ways he could never have imagined. On June 29, 1968, Sheck and Edward were testing their limits in the spring's deep waters. Edward, determined to outdo his older brother, dove down to an estimated depth of 50 feet. But as he turned to ascend, something went wrong. Edward suddenly went limp and began sinking deeper into the spring. Sheck, watching from the surface, immediately dove down to try to save his brother. But without scuba gear, he was powerless to reach Edward in time. By the time Sheck managed to retrieve an air tank from his car and return to the water, it was too late. Edward was pulled from the spring unconscious and rushed to the hospital, where he was placed on life support. Tragically, he was declared brain dead and taken off life support later that night. The loss of his brother was a devastating blow for Sheck. Edward had been more than just a sibling. He was a diving partner, a competitor, and a friend. Sheck's dedication to diving safety began almost immediately after Edward's death. He started studying the science of diving, learning everything he could about the physiological effects of pressure, gas mixtures, and decompression. He also began documenting his own dives, meticulously recording every detail in a logbook. This attention to detail would become one of his defining characteristics, earning him a reputation as one of the most disciplined and safety-conscious divers in the world. By the time he was in his early 20s, Sheck had already established himself as a rising star in the diving community. He was known for his calm demeanor, his analytical mind, and his ability to stay focused under pressure. These qualities made him a natural fit for cave diving, a relatively new and extremely dangerous form of diving that was quickly gaining popularity in Florida. Cave diving is not for the faint of heart. Cave diving involves navigating tight, dark, and often labyrinthine passages. One wrong turn or equipment failure can be fatal. But for Sheck, the challenge was irresistible. He saw cave diving as the ultimate test of skill, knowledge, and courage. Sheck's first cave dive was a revelation. As he later described it, entering an underwater cave was like stepping into another world. The silence, the darkness, and the sheer beauty of the formations left him in awe. From that moment on, he was hooked. Over the next few years, Sheck became one of the most prolific cave divers in the world, logging hundreds of dives in some of the most challenging caves in Florida and beyond. But Sheck wasn't content to just explore caves. He wanted to understand them. He began studying the geology of caves, learning how they formed and how water flowed through them. He also started experimenting with different diving techniques and equipment, always looking for ways to improve safety and efficiency. In 1979, Sheck published Basic Cave Diving, a blueprint for survival, a book that would become the Bible of cave diving. The book was groundbreaking in its approach to safety, emphasizing the importance of planning, preparation, and teamwork. It also introduced the concept of the rule of thirds, which states that divers should use 1/3 of their air supply for the descent, 1/3 for the ascent, and keep 1/3 in reserve for emergencies. The publication of Basic Cave Diving cemented Sheck's reputation as one of the foremost experts in the field. But it was his record-breaking dives that made him a legend. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Sheck had already logged more than 100 cave dives. By his 40s, that number had skyrocketed to over 4,000. The loss of his brother could have ended Sheck's diving career before it even began. Instead, it fueled a lifelong passion for exploration and a commitment to making the sport safer for others. That would be no small feat, since deep diving isn't just a test of courage or skill, it's a battle against the laws of physics and the limits of human physiology. Every descent into the abyss brings with it a host of challenges, from the crushing pressure of the water to the complex interplay of gases in the bloodstream. For Sheck Exley, understanding these challenges was not just a matter of curiosity, it was a matter of survival. At its core, deep diving is a science. It's a field where physics, physiology, and technology intersect, creating a complex web of challenges and solutions. The deeper a diver goes, the more the environment changes, and the more the body must adapt. The first and most obvious challenge is pressure. For every 33 feet a diver descends, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. At 1,000 feet, the depth Sheck was aiming for in Zacaton, the pressure is a staggering 30 times greater than at the surface. This immense pressure affects everything from the density of the air in a diver's lungs to the behavior of the gases they breathe. At extreme depths, even the smallest mistake can have catastrophic consequences. A poorly sealed mask or a malfunctioning regulator can lead to rapid decompression, a condition where the pressure inside the body suddenly drops, causing gases to expand and tissues to rupture. But pressure is just one part of the equation. As a diver descends, the gases they breathe, typically a mixture of nitrogen, oxygen, and sometimes helium, begin to behave in unexpected ways. Nitrogen, which makes up about 78% of the air we breathe, becomes increasingly narcotic at depth. This condition, known as nitrogen narcosis, can cause symptoms ranging from mild euphoria to severe disorientation and hallucinations. Sheck Exley was uniquely resistant to nitrogen narcosis, a trait that set him apart from most divers. While others might feel the effects at depths as shallow as 100 feet, Sheck could descend to 465 feet before experiencing any symptoms. This resistance allowed him to push the boundaries of deep diving, but it also made him acutely aware of the dangers faced by less fortunate divers. To mitigate the risks of nitrogen narcosis, deep divers often use gas mixtures with reduced nitrogen content. One common mixture is trimix, which combines nitrogen, oxygen, and helium. Sheck experienced HPNS for the first time during a dive in South Africa's Bushman's Hole, where violent tremors and distorted vision forced him to abort the dive. The science of deep diving also involves careful planning of decompression stops. As a diver ascends, the pressure decreases, and the gases dissolved in their bloodstream begin to come out of solution. If the ascent is too rapid, These gases can form bubbles, leading to decompression sickness. To avoid decompression sickness, divers must make a series of stops at specific depths, allowing their bodies to slowly release the excess gases. The deeper the dive, the longer and more complex these stops become. For Sheck's planned dive in Zacaton, the ascent was expected to take around 10 hours and involve more than 50 decompression stops. The gas mixtures used during these stops are also critical. However, too much oxygen at depth can be toxic, causing seizures and loss of consciousness. Balancing these factors requires precise calculations and a deep understanding of gas physiology. Sheck Exley was a master of this science. He worked closely with physiologists to develop gas mixtures tailored to his dives, and he meticulously planned every aspect of his descents and ascents. But even with all his knowledge and preparation, deep diving remained an inherently risky endeavor. Fast forward to 1994, and Sheck Exley was already a legend in the diving world, holding multiple world records for deep dives and authoring the definitive guide on cave diving safety. His passion for exploration was matched only by his commitment to making the sport safer for others. But Zacaton was different. This wasn't just another dive. It was a dive into the unknown, a place where no human had ever ventured before. The Zacaton sinkhole, located in northeastern Mexico, is one of the most enigmatic and treacherous dive sites on Earth. Known as the deepest water-filled sinkhole in the world, Zacaton plunges more than 1,000 feet into the earth, its depths shrouded in darkness and mystery. For Sheck Exley, it represented the ultimate challenge, a chance to push the boundaries of human exploration and set a new world record for deep diving. Sheck and his diving partner, Jim Bowden, had spent countless hours planning and preparing for the attempt. They knew the risks involved. Deep diving is inherently dangerous, and Zacaton's extreme depth made it even more so. But for Sheck, the allure of the unknown was irresistible. This wasn't just about breaking a record. It was about exploring a place no human had ever been before. The plan was meticulous, as all of Sheck's dives were. They would enter Zacaton through a nearby spring, swimming through a 600-foot tunnel that connected to the sinkhole. Once inside, they would descend rapidly, using weighted guide ropes to navigate the darkness. The descent would take about 10 minutes, with stops to switch gas mixtures at specific depths. At the bottom, Sheck planned to touch the floor of the sinkhole and immediately begin his ascent, a process that would take approximately 10 hours and involve more than 50 decompression stops. The gas mixtures were critical to the dive's success. At extreme depths, the air we breathe becomes toxic, and the nitrogen in standard scuba tanks can cause narcosis. To counteract these effects, Sheck and Jim would use a combination of gases. Each gas mixture was carefully calculated to minimize the risks of narcosis, high-pressure nervous syndrome, and oxygen toxicity. On the morning of April 6, 1994, Sheck, Jim, and their support team arrived at Zacaton. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Sheck, who had recently turned 45, had announced that this would be his last extreme dive. He wanted to go out on a high note, and reaching 1,000 feet seemed like the perfect way to do it. As they prepared to enter the water, Sheck and Jim took a moment to meditate, visualizing every step of the dive. At 9:45 a.m., they slipped beneath the surface and began their descent. The first 300 feet were uneventful, but as they approached 600 feet, the pressure began to take its toll. Jim, who was descending slightly ahead of Sheck, started to experience symptoms of high-pressure nervous syndrome. His descent had been faster than planned, and the excess helium in his body was wreaking havoc on his nervous system. His body began to tremble uncontrollably, and his vision blurred. Despite the discomfort, Jim pressed on, determined to reach the planned depth. But at 925 feet, he realized something was wrong. His gas supply was running out faster than expected, and he knew he had to ascend immediately. He inflated his buoyancy compensator and began the long journey back to the surface, leaving Sheck to continue the descent alone. For Sheck, the dive was going according to plan, or so it seemed. As he passed the 900-foot mark, he was in uncharted territory, deeper than any human had ever gone before. But then, something went wrong. On the surface, the support team watched anxiously as the bubbles rising from the water disappeared, indicating that Sheck and Jim had passed the 250-foot ledge. Based on their calculations, the bubbles should have reappeared within 12 to 18 minutes. Right on schedule, bubbles broke the surface above Jim's rope, but there was no sign of Sheck. Minutes turned into hours, and still, there was no word from Sheck. The support team grew increasingly concerned. Sheck's wife, Mary Ellen, dove into the sinkhole herself, desperate to find her husband. But the depths of Zacaton are unforgiving, and without the proper gas mixtures, she was forced to turn back. By the time Jim surfaced nearly 10 hours later, it was clear that Sheck was gone. The support team, devastated but determined, began the grim task of recovering his body. Using the weighted guide ropes, they pulled Sheck's lifeless form from the depths of Zacaton. The way he was attached to the rope suggested that he had known he wasn't coming back and had tied himself to it to ensure his body could be found. The death of Sheck Exley on April 6, 1994, was a seismic event in the diving world. Sheck wasn't just a diver. He was a pioneer, a teacher, and a safety advocate whose influence extended far beyond his record-breaking dives. In the aftermath of the Zacaton incident, the diving community was left to grapple with the loss of one of its greatest figures while seeking to understand what had gone wrong. The immediate aftermath of Sheck's death was marked by grief and disbelief. For his wife, Mary Ellen, the tragedy was deeply personal. She had been on the scene during the dive, and her desperate attempt to find Sheck in the depths of Zacaton was a testament to her love and determination. As the diving community mourned, questions began to emerge about what had gone wrong. Sheck was known for his meticulous planning and attention to detail, so how could such a tragedy have occurred? The answer, as it turned out, was not straightforward. One of the leading theories was that Sheck had experienced a severe case of high-pressure nervous syndrome. Sheck had experienced HPNS before, during the Bushman's hole dive in South Africa, and it was possible that the condition had returned with even greater severity in Zacaton. If the tremors were violent enough, they could have caused Sheck to lose control of his regulator, leading to drowning. But despite the uncertainty surrounding the exact cause of Sheck's death, one thing was clear: his legacy would live on. In the weeks and months that followed, tributes poured in from around the world. Sheck was remembered not just for his record-breaking dives, but for his contributions to diving safety and his unwavering commitment to the sport he loved. One of the most poignant tributes came from Jim Bowden, Sheck's diving partner on that fateful day. Jim, who had narrowly escaped his own brush with death during the dive, was deeply affected by Sheck's passing. In the years that followed, he became an advocate for diving safety, working to ensure that the lessons learned from the Zacaton incident would not be forgotten. Sheck's death also had a profound impact on the diving community as a whole. In the wake of the tragedy, there was a renewed focus on safety protocols and the importance of thorough planning. Sheck's book, Basic Cave Diving, A Blueprint for Survival, became required reading for anyone serious about the sport, and his emphasis on the rule of thirds and other safety measures became standard practice. Today, only a handful of people have ever reached the depths Sheck was aiming for, and each of them owes a debt to his pioneering spirit. The current world record for a deep dive stands at 1,090 feet, a testament to the progress made in the decades since Sheck's death. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Sheck Exley's life and death is the inspiration he provided to others. Sheck was a man who dared to dream big, who pushed the boundaries of what was possible and inspired others to do the same. His passion for exploration and his commitment to safety have left an indelible mark on the world of diving, and his story continues to inspire new generations of divers. In the years since Sheck's death, Zacaton has remained a place of both beauty and danger. The sinkhole, with its crystal-clear waters and mysterious depths, continues to draw divers from around the world, but it is also a place of remembrance, a reminder of the risks and rewards of exploring the unknown. Caving is one thing that I am personally scared of. It takes years and years of practice and even those years of experience. What if the cave decides to close up and lock you inside? What if there is no reception down below? Are you going to make it out of there, or will that forever be your grave? Here are 3 stories that left me on edge. At some point, I gnarled my teeth and chewed my nails. I've never had to warn my viewers, but today, viewers' discretion is advised. On April 22, 2023, the unexpected happened. It literally dropped my jaw, and what started as a simple family outing for 49-year-old Carl O'Keefe turned into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. Carl, a father of 3, visited the Kong Adventure Center in Keswick, England, with plans for a day of celebration and adventure. He entered their indoor caving system, a labyrinth of tight, man-made tunnels designed to thrill. But for Carl, this was no thrill. Maybe it was at first, but at the latter end, it became a tragic and fatal experience. A day meant for joy and bonding turned into a horrifying fight for survival. Carl O'Keefe was not a stranger to adventure. With a background in climbing and caving, he possessed the physical strength, mental focus, and careful judgment required for such activities. His family described him as a brilliant man, a devoted father, and a strong advocate for the neurodiverse community. Known for his characteristic dark glasses worn due to photophobia, Carl was also about to start a PhD in astrophysics. His future seemed limitless. A journey of exploration in both the physical and intellectual realms. On this April day, Carl joined his children, his sister, and his niece to celebrate his niece's birthday at the Kong Adventure Center, which is located in the scenic Lake District. The center is well known for its range of activities, including climbing walls, outdoor adventures, and a very finely and precisely made fiberglass caving system. The caves, marketed as family-friendly, had, however, drawn mixed reviews. Previous visitors often remarked on the tightness of the tunnels, warning that they might be too small for adults. For kids, it was an exciting playground. For adults, it could be a claustrophobic challenge. Some proclaimed that at some point in the tunnels, you might feel like the walls are closing in on you. You might feel like the air is getting thinner, and you might just begin to panic. And with that shortness of breath, only Mother Nature knows what is going to happen. Carl and the kids entered, eager to explore. The children, light, nimble, slender, and tiny, navigated the passages with ease, laughing as they crawled through the narrow spaces. For Carl, the experience quickly turned into a struggle. Despite being of average build, he found himself grappling with the unforgiving design of the tunnels. Some reports suggest he tripped and fell into a crevice, while others claim he became wedged while attempting to turn in a narrow section. Either way, Carl was firmly stuck, and the situation escalated from discomfort to danger. As they said, the walls began to feel like they were closing in, and every passing second felt like the air was thinning out with every breath. Noticing his distress, Carl's children alerted the adults, who immediately informed the staff. Panic rippled through the group as the reality of the situation set in. Staff members rushed to the scene, initially attempting to free Carl using ropes and physical force. Their efforts were earnest, but the means proved futile. Recognizing the severity of the situation, they called emergency services. The call to 999 triggered a massive response. Police, fire departments, the Keswick Mountain Rescue Team, and the Hazardous Area Response Team all converged on the scene. The operation was complex and urgent. By this point, Carl had been trapped in a static position for over an hour. His breathing had lost pattern, and he was already fighting to breathe every breath he could at the moment, and the strain on his body was evident. Time was running out. Staff and visitors were desperate to help, and they began dismantling the climbing wall panels to access the hidden tunnels. This was no small feat. The caving system, crafted from durable fiberglass, required specialized cutting equipment to safely remove sections without further risking Carl's life. Over 50 people joined forces in the rescue operation, a remarkable display of teamwork and determination. Every cut had to be precise, and every second was important. A little mistake, and they could fatally hurt him. Every second more, and he could give up his life. The scene was a gruesome mix of urgency and precision. Professionals worked methodically, balancing speed with caution, while Carl's family watched in helpless agony. The children, who moments earlier had been laughing in those very tunnels, were now witnesses to a terrifying reality. For Carl, each passing moment was a battle, not just against the physical confines, but also against the creeping weight of fear. As rescuers cut through the fiberglass, the task proved more challenging than anticipated. The tunnels that were originally designed for excitement had become a prison of torment, holding a grown man against his own will and taking his life from him with each. Each cut had to be precise, avoiding vibrations or movements that could further harm Carl. Meanwhile, medics on site monitored his condition, providing what aid they could under the constrained circumstances. Carl's ordeal was more than a tragedy. It was an agonizing marathon of helplessness for everyone involved. For over 4 hours, rescuers battled against time, determined to free him from the narrow, unforgiving confines of the cave. Meanwhile, Carl's family could only stand by, hearts heavy with despair, watching as hope ebbed with each passing minute. It was the kind of scenario you'd expect to see in a survival movie, except this was all too real. When Carl was finally extricated, it was evident the fight was far from over. He was rushed to the hospital, but the injuries he had sustained were catastrophic. 10 days later, surrounded by his devastated family, Carl succumbed to his wounds. His sister, who had remained by his side throughout the ordeal, described it as the darkest chapter of her life. Witnessing her brother's decline, unable to do anything but hold his hand, left her with emotional scars that would never fade. The aftermath of Carl's death sparked intense scrutiny. Questions emerged about the Kong Adventure Center's caving attraction, a place that marketed itself as family-friendly but seemed to be anything but safe. Online reviews from as far back as 2017 hinted at the danger. One visitor recalled how her husband, who was just under 6 feet tall, had gotten stuck in the caves. She described the incident as terrifying, mentioning the absence of supervision and how unprepared the staff seemed to handle emergencies. Another review bluntly warned that the caves were far too tight for adults, suggesting they should be restricted to children. Despite these red flags, no significant safety measures were implemented before Carl's visit. The Kong Adventure Center seemed to prioritize excitement over caution. The caves, with their narrow tunnels and a single, unforgiving exit, were a disaster waiting to happen. For an adult like Carl, unfamiliar with the layout, the design was not just challenging, it was deadly. The thrill of squeezing through tight spaces, enticing for children, became a trap for anyone larger or less agile. Once trapped, there was little room for maneuvering, let alone escape. Carl's sister didn't hold back when discussing the emotional toll the incident took on her. Her brother had been her best friend, someone she could always rely on. Watching him suffer and feeling utterly powerless to save him was a torment that no one should endure. The grief and trauma etched into her family's lives were profound and unrelenting. The incident was a stark reminder that attractions marketed as fun must also be held accountable for their safety standards. Carl's death wasn't just an unfortunate accident, it was preventable. The tragedy exposed glaring oversights in the facility's safety protocols, or lack thereof, and the absence of any meaningful response to previous complaints. Imagine being in Carl's position, trapped in a suffocatingly tight tunnel, unable to move, the air around you growing heavy, and the darkness pressing in. It's not just the stuff of nightmares, it is the nightmare, and yet, it became his reality. For his family, those harrowing hours waiting for rescue were an emotional roller coaster, each moment oscillating between hope and despair. The relief of seeing him freed was short-lived, replaced by the crushing pain of watching him succumb to his injuries. The Kong Adventure Center faced mounting scrutiny after the tragedy, with investigations launched to determine how such a disaster could occur. Yet, as of now, no meaningful changes have been reported, and the findings of the inquest remain undisclosed. The silence surrounding the issue has only deepened the frustration and grief of those who lost Carl. Carl's story is more than just a cautionary tale, it's a call to action. His life was not defined by this tragedy. He was a father, a brother, and a compassionate soul who believed in uplifting others. His untimely death must serve as a catalyst for change, pushing for stricter safety regulations in recreational facilities. No family should have to endure such a devastating loss because of preventable oversights. For now, Carl's loved ones are left with memories of a life cut short and a void that will never be filled. His sister's words capture the depth of their sorrow. The world lost not just a victim of negligence, but a remarkable person whose absence will be felt forever. The haunting details of this tragedy linger as a stark reminder of the cost of complacency. As you think about this story, consider the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance, even in seemingly safe environments. Carl's story is a sobering reminder that joy and tragedy can exist side by side, separated by moments. His legacy, however, is one of love, intellect, and the hope that lessons will be learnt from his untimely passing. That touched me in dimensions that shook my being. This next story, I can't tell if it will have a better ending. On August 9, 1980, 4 adventurers, Bruce Unger, Scott Tron, Louise Jose, and Tom Strong, entered the Lost Creek cave system in Colorado, unaware of the terror awaiting them. These caves, carved through rocky landscapes near Denver, were both stunning and dangerous. The group had picked a specific cave known as the Lowermost Cave, which was challenging because no one had ever fully traversed it, from the lower entrance to the upper exit. The allure of being pioneers heightened their excitement, but little did they know that every inch of that journey would be excruciating. Bruce Unger, the leader of the group, was an experienced caver who had ventured into dangerous caves before. He had faced high-flow water systems in the past, but nothing would prepare him for what lay ahead, or better, nature was unforgiving for him daring her. They were determined, and with their peak determination, they equipped themselves well, wearing wetsuits to fend off the icy water and bringing both carbide and electric lamps. They believed they were ready for anything, but so was the cave. It was ready for anything that came into it. The group stepped into the cave entrance at 11:30 a.m., their hearts pounding with anticipation and confidence, fused with their excitement, and it was lovely. As they descended, the echoes of rushing water intensified. The caves tightened around them, forcing them to maneuver through narrow passageways and slippery rocks. Each step tested their nerves. The deeper they went, the more the environment seemed to come alive, almost as if the cave were testing their resolve. It felt like the walls began to choke them in, and slowly it felt like with every inch, it got narrower and narrower. Roughly 150 feet in, they encountered their first major challenge, a powerful water chute. The chute was a 2-foot wide, 15-foot long slope at a sharp angle. Water roared through it like a beast, making the passage treacherous. The chute connected to a larger chamber on the other side, but crossing it would be more than perilous. It would take guts to even think of moving any further, but Bruce was eager. He led the way, climbing in first. Using friction holds on the slippery rock, he battled the strong current, inching upward with every movement and trying to hold on, for he knew that his dear life was on the line. Any little mistake and he would be a goner. He urged caution to those below, warning of the chute's slickness, but then disaster struck. As Bruce was moving up, Bruce lost his footing. The water seized him with fury, dragging him back down the chute with a force so terrifying. His body slammed into the water below, and before he could recover, his left foot became lodged in a crevice. Panic gripped Bruce as he realized his boot was stuck. The water's relentless pressure pinned him, and despite his struggles, he could not free himself. He screamed at the top of his voice for help. His voice was laced with fear and filled with desperation. Desperation to live. Louise Jose scrambled up the chute, reaching him first. She tried desperately to pull his leg free, but the boot was wedged too tightly. Meanwhile, Tron and Strong prepared to assist, but the raging water fought against them. As Louise repositioned herself to help Bruce keep his head above water, she lost her grip. The current swept her down the chute. Nature was unforgiving, and in its grip it had two people, and had the power to decide what would be of their fate. Tron and Strong collided with Louise in the pool below, adding to the confusion. Determined to help, Tron managed to climb back up to Bruce. He grabbed Bruce's hand, holding on as tightly as he could, but the water was relentless, thrashing them both. Bruce's strength waned. He pleaded for help, his voice barely audible over the roaring water. Suddenly, Tron's grip failed. Bruce's head disappeared beneath the surface, and the panic only grew. The current threw Tron back down the chute. The others were now in darkness, their carbide lamps extinguished by the icy water. Only Louise's electric lamp flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the cave walls. Desperation filled the air as they realized Bruce was no longer visible. Tron, refusing to give up, climbed back to Bruce's last position. His heart pounded as he grasped Bruce's helmet, pulling with every ounce of strength. The helmet came off in his hands. Tron's stomach sank as he tried again, but the water hurled him back down the chute once more. Louise and Strong, understanding the dire situation, shed their packs and ropes to move faster. They climbed the chute repeatedly, driven by the slim hope of finding Bruce alive. But the cave seemed to conspire against them, its icy grip tightening with each failed attempt. The water was merciless, a roaring force that swallowed Bruce entirely. Minutes passed, each one an eternity. Exhausted and heartbroken, the group reached the top of the chute again. They stared into the swirling water, the cold reality sinking in. Bruce was gone. At 2:45 p.m., they made the agonizing decision to leave the cave. There was nothing more they could do. The cave had claimed Bruce, and their own survival now depended on escaping its clutches. They exited in silence, their grief heavy. 2 weeks later, a recovery team returned to the cave. The water flow had diminished, revealing Bruce's body wedged beneath a boulder. It took hours of careful effort to free him. The team brought him back to the surface, where an autopsy revealed the cause of death. Bruce had suffered extensive head injuries, including fractures to his skull and neck. These injuries likely resulted from his head repeatedly striking the cave walls as the water dragged him. Drowning seemed less likely. The blunt force trauma had been enough to claim his life. The tragedy raised questions about their preparation and decisions. Bruce's boots, while sturdy, were unsuitable for the slippery cave surfaces. Their lack of a more structured rescue plan also played a role. In their panic, critical options like securing Bruce's head above water were overlooked. Despite these lessons, the cave's dangers remain. The Lost Creek system, while beautiful, is a reminder of nature's unforgiving power. Those who venture into its depths must respect its risks, for it is not just a test of skill, but also a challenge to survive. The story of Bruce Unger is a haunting one. His passion for adventure led him to a place where beauty and danger intertwined, and ultimately, it cost him his life. As his friends left the cave that day, they carried not just the weight of their grief, but also the knowledge that the cave had taken one of its own. On June 14, 2003, two seasoned cavers, Tom Dawson and Bob Sacco, ventured into Colorado's rugged wilderness for what they thought would be a thrilling day of exploration. Their goal was the newly discovered land of the Swirling Mists Cave, an underground labyrinth that had captured the imagination of adventurers. The air was filled with excitement as they prepared to uncover hidden passages and chart the unknown. Deep within the earth, the cave was alive. The sound of dripping water echoed through the dark corridors, the damp air carrying the smell of earth and mystery. Dawson and Sacco pushed forward, their lights casting flickering shadows on the jagged walls. The main level had already been explored, but the south end of the lobby, a massive room filled with unstable rock piles, held untold secrets. Dawson, always seeking a challenge, decided to dig through the unstable pile in hopes of discovering a new tunnel. He lay on his side, pulling rocks away carefully, his body pressed against the cold, damp floor. He avoided the larger rocks, trusting his instincts to keep him safe. The cave felt ominous, the distant echoes amplifying the tension. Without warning, a sickening scrape cut through the air. Time seemed to slow as a massive slab of rock, 10 inches thick and several feet wide, broke loose from the ceiling. It crashed down with terrifying force, pinning Dawson beneath its crushing weight. Pain erupted through Dawson's body. His chest exploded with a sharp, sickening pop as his ribs cracked under the pressure. Each breath became a shallow, jagged gasp, his broken ribs grinding together like knives stabbing into his lungs. A white-hot flash of pain shot through his left shoulder as it dislocated, leaving his arm limp and useless. He was trapped. The cold, unyielding rock pinned him to the cave floor, his right arm awkwardly stretched above his head. His dislocated shoulder throbbed with fiery pain, every tiny movement sending fresh waves of agony. He tried to shift his body, but the weight of the slab pressed down harder with each attempt. Sacco, seeing his friend pinned and crying out, frantically started digging to free him. The slab was relentless, its crushing force intensifying as Sacco removed rocks. Dawson's legs were visible, but his torso and head were completely trapped. The cave seemed to tighten around them, its darkness growing heavier. The slab suddenly shifted, its enormous weight smacking Dawson's helmet and pinning his head in place. His breaths became shallower, his strength fading. His free hand groped for the chin strap of his helmet, his numb fingers desperately trying to release it. With one last effort, he managed to unclip the strap and slide his head out just as the rock slammed into the space where he had been. Dawson's body was a wreck, his ribs burnt from the impact, his dislocated shoulder hung useless, and his head throbbed with pain. He knew he couldn't stay there. The cave felt like it was closing in, threatening to claim him. Ignoring the agony, he bolted, leaving behind his helmet, gear, and even the thoughts of his injuries. Sacco shoved a light into his hand, and Dawson barely acknowledged it. His mind was consumed by one thought: survival. He stumbled through the dark, his vision blurred and his body screaming in protest. He reached the narrow crawlway near the cave entrance, dropping his hands and knees. The crawlway was tight, every movement a battle against the sharp rocks and his failing body. His head spun, his vision blurred, and his heart pounded. Halfway through, his strength gave out. He collapsed, the world tilting around him. His weak and strained voice called out for help. Near the cave entrance, his wife Nancy heard his cries. She rushed to him, her hands grabbing the collar of his cave suit. Using every ounce of her strength, she dragged him forward while he feebly pushed with his feet. Each pull sent waves of pain crashing through his body. His broken ribs ground together, his breaths shallow and labored. Finally, they emerged from the crawlway into the larger passage leading to the cave's entrance. Dawson's body was on the verge of collapse. his mind teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. Outside, the fresh air hit him like a wave, but he couldn't enjoy it. Nancy sprinted to the car and called for help. By the time they reached the visitor center, an ambulance was waiting. Dawson was rushed to the hospital, where the full extent of his injuries was revealed. He had suffered a concussion, multiple broken ribs, internal bleeding, dislocated shoulder, and countless other injuries. The day that began with excitement nearly ended in tragedy. He Cave had shown no mercy, its dark corridors and treacherous rocks turning a thrilling adventure into a nightmare. Dawson survived, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain forever. The land of the swirling mists cave is no ordinary place. Its beauty hides its dangers, and its allure can quickly turn deadly. Dawson's escape was a testament to sheer willpower, but it was also a chilling reminder of the risks lurking in the darkness. Be careful what you look for and be careful what you wish for. You see this guy? He went cave searching. When he found what he was looking for, like Avatar Roku from Avatar: The Last Airbender, he vanished. In June 2014, a mysterious comment on YouTube set off a chain of events that has puzzled many to this day. The comment, posted by a user named Snakebit McGee, described an unusual experience in a cave near the Mojave Desert. The cave was shaped like a giant letter M and was located near Nellis Air Force Base in Area 51. According to McGee, as he entered the cave, his body began to vibrate intensely, an experience so strange that he fled in fear. Little did he know, this comment would spark widespread curiosity and change his life forever. Snakebit McGee's real identity was Kenny Leaf, a 47-year-old hiker with a passion for exploring remote locations. He had an impressive hiking record across Nevada and California, often venturing solo into the wild. Kenny also posted occasional videos on his own YouTube channel where he shared his outdoor adventures. His comment about the cave caught the attention of many online, with people intrigued by the mysterious cave he described. They were especially curious about the strange vibration he claimed to have felt. Kenny's online persona quickly gained attention as people became fascinated with his adventurous spirit and bold claims. He often boasted about his solo hikes, stating that he had been doing this for over 20 years. He described scaling mountain peaks, navigating dangerous cliffs, and surviving tough conditions. He even told a story about being rescued by helicopter after injuring his leg while hiking. Despite his many wild stories, some viewers were skeptical and demanded proof of his extraordinary feats. The story of the M Cave sparked even more curiosity when Kenny promised to return to the cave and document his experience. He wrote that he would bring a camera and a 9mm pistol for protection, as the terrain was difficult and dangerous. People online egged him on, urging him to go back and film what he found. Finally, in October 2014, Kenny set out to fulfill his promise, determined to find the mysterious cave once more. On his hike, Kenny filmed his journey and shared updates with his followers. He described the challenging 10-hour hike through the mountains north of Las Vegas, heading towards the cave he had discovered earlier. He explained that the cave was located in a narrow crevice, and he had been spooked the first time he encountered it. He felt the strange vibration the closer he got to the cave, which made him decide to leave without exploring further. This time, however, he was determined to go back and see what lay inside. As Kenny ventured closer to the M Cave, he described the landscape around him. The cave itself, shaped like a large M, stood on the side of a mountain, looking just as he remembered. He was excited to explore it further, but also cautious. His earlier fear lingered in his mind. With his camera in hand and a gun for protection, Kenny made his way toward the entrance of the cave, hoping to uncover whatever secret it might hold. However, despite his efforts, Kenny's journey took an unexpected turn. After making his way through the narrow crevice and reaching the cave, he vanished without a trace. His last video, which was posted on YouTube, was the last anyone heard from him. Since then, the mystery of Kenny's disappearance has only deepened. Some believe he was caught up in something far bigger than he ever imagined, while others think he simply got lost in the wild. Kenny V's story is one full of mystery, adventure, and unanswered questions. It all began in 2014 when Kenny, an avid hiker, shared a comment on YouTube about a mysterious cave he'd discovered. This cave, which he called the M Cave because of its M shape, was located in the Mojave Desert. not far from Area 51. Kenny described an eerie feeling when he approached the cave. His whole body vibrated, and it made him feel uneasy, enough to turn around and leave. Despite being an experienced hiker and spelunker, Kenny had never felt such fear before. This odd experience caught the attention of many online, especially those into hiking and conspiracy theories. They were intrigued by the idea of a hidden cave near the infamous Area 51, with some believing it might be a secret military base entrance. Others thought it was just an ordinary cave, but Kenny's description of the strange vibrations made many curious. Kenny was no stranger to hiking alone. He often boasted about his adventurous life, tackling tough terrain and mountains. His solo expeditions were the stuff of legend, and his online followers loved hearing about them. However, the M Cave was different. Despite his many daring hikes, he couldn't shake the strange feeling it gave him. This only added to the cave's mystery and sparked even more interest online. Soon after his comment about the M Cave, Kenny promised to return and film his next visit. He wanted to prove it wasn't just a tall tale. Many doubted him, accusing him of exaggerating or making up stories for attention. But Kenny, being the determined adventurer he was, wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He made plans to return to the cave, this time armed with a video camera and a firearm for safety. He promised his followers an exciting video, but his journey didn't go as planned. When Kenny went back to the Mojave Desert in October 2014, he set off on a 10-hour hike to find the M Cave. He filmed part of his journey, describing the terrain and the challenges he faced. Unfortunately, after hours of hiking, he couldn't find the cave. Frustrated but undeterred, he returned home and posted a video online admitting his failure. He promised to keep searching until he found the M Cave again, and he even dared his critics to join him on the hike. But no one took him up on the challenge. As Kenny planned his next hike, he made a comment about wanting to spend 3 days hiking and covering 40 miles to find the cave. But soon, something strange happened. Kenny vanished. In early November 2014, he went on another solo hike, this time without a camera to slow him down. He planned to camp for 2 days in the mountains near his home, but after that, no one heard from him. His family didn't get any messages, and his ex-girlfriend became concerned. When she checked his Facebook page, she saw messages from friends saying he was missing. His disappearance was reported on November 17th. His former sister-in-law, Susan, told a reporter that she was shocked by the news. She had just wished Kenny a happy birthday the day before and expected a reply, but that never came. As the days passed, more and more people started worrying. His family didn't know what to think. Some feared he had been reckless and hurt himself while hiking, possibly getting trapped somewhere in the desert. Rescue teams were sent out, and on November 22nd, they found Kenny's truck, and then something that made everyone even more confused: his cell phone. It was found near an old mine that was featured in one of Kenny's earlier videos. The phone was lying next to mine, but it was unclear whether Kenny dropped it or if he had intentionally left it there. It was a strange clue, and many people began speculating about what happened to him. Was it an accident or something more sinister? Kenny's daughter Vicky was also contacted. She immediately became suspicious when she heard about the phone being found by the mine. In Nevada, people often talked about how bodies could be hidden in abandoned mines, never to be found. She couldn't believe that her dad would just leave his phone behind like that. Something about it didn't seem right, and she feared that this might be part of a bigger mystery. After Kenny went missing, the trail went cold after that. But years later, a comment from his ex-girlfriend, Sharon, stirred up a whole new theory about what happened to him. She claimed that the commander of the search and rescue team told her that their search ended when the tracks reached the mine and there was nowhere else to go. It was a puzzling end to the search, especially since Kenny had been missing for so long. One thing that seemed strange was when Kenny was reported missing. Sharon didn't contact the authorities until November 17th, a full week after he had gone missing. That delay made people question the timing of the search. The police report said that the search didn't begin until 12 days after Kenny's hike. At that point, it was too late. Search teams only found his cell phone next to mine, and by then, they were no longer searching actively. A human can only survive in the desert for so long without water, so people were left wondering if this was a case of pure bad luck. Many theories surfaced about Kenny's disappearance. Some believed he stumbled upon a hidden tunnel connected to Area 51 and was somehow silenced. Kenny had always shown interest in UFOs and extraterrestrial life, often interacting with people online who believed in aliens. His connection to the mysterious M cave, which he claimed to have found near Area 51, made the whole thing seem even stranger. But this theory was just that, a theory. Other, more practical ideas suggested that Kenny simply succumbed to the desert elements or maybe fell into a mining shaft. A few people who had been following the case suggested that the phone was left deliberately by Kenny. The phone was found near a landmark, the old mine, and it seemed like it was meant to be found. If Kenny wanted to keep his phone hidden, he would have tossed it somewhere out in the desert, far from the mine. But that didn't happen. The idea was that Kenny might have wanted people to believe he had fallen into the mine. Search teams even dropped a camera into the mine shaft, but there was nothing there. Still, the phone being found there added an eerie twist to the whole mystery. As time passed, people started to question Kenny's risky behavior. He was always pushing himself to do more, sometimes without proper preparation. He had even gotten injured before, and in his last video, he tripped during a hike. His reckless nature in the desert made some people think he had simply taken one step too many and met an unfortunate fate. One comment from a YouTube user, a retired archaeologist, pointed out that the desert is full of dangerous old mining shafts. People, including hikers and dirt bikers, had fallen into them before, so it wasn't out of the question that Kenny could have made a simple mistake and fallen into one of these deep holes. This seemed like a plausible explanation to many. But the mystery didn't die there. A bombshell comment appeared on YouTube from Sharon Pilgrim, who revealed herself as Kenny's girlfriend. At first, people weren't sure if she was telling the truth, but as more details came to light, it became clear she was. Sharon shared how she and Kenny used to go on daring hikes together, but she also offered a different perspective on his disappearance. She didn't think it was an accident at all. Instead, she believed Kenny had planned to disappear. Sharon explained that Kenny had been struggling with depression for a long time and had refused to take medication or see a doctor. A year before he disappeared, he had even quit his job. Sharon thought Kenny had gone into the desert with the intention of not returning. This new theory added another layer of complexity to the case. It was no longer just about a missing person. It was about someone who may have made a choice to vanish. Sharon's insight into Kenny's state of mind painted a picture of someone who had given up on life and didn't want to be found. It wasn't a tragic accident, but a decision driven by personal struggles. The search for Kenny was intense. A team of rescuers scoured the desert on foot while a helicopter flew overhead, but no sign of Kenny or his belongings was found. They did, however, find a cell phone near an old mine. This raised suspicions. Kenny left the phone behind on purpose, maybe to prevent anyone from tracking him through its GPS. His video camera, which he usually used for his adventures, was left at home, which made it clear he didn't plan on filming anything during this solo hike. One thing that stood out during the investigation was the cell phone found at the mine. Sharon, Kenny's girlfriend, mentioned something troubling. When Kenny was reported missing, the police found a computer in his house with the words, "Help me," written all over it. But nobody bothered to investigate his tech devices further, like his camera or laptop. They didn't check for any signs of a struggle or investigate his online activity. That seemed like a huge mistake. Sharon even suggested they could have found some clues if they had done a more thorough job. Sharon also recalled a conversation with Kenny a few weeks before his disappearance. He had told her that he was struggling with thoughts of ending his life, and that he planned to do it in the mountains where no one would find him. After that conversation, Sharon asked Kenny to check in with her every 5 days. If she didn't hear from him, she promised to call the police. Kenny was supposed to text her after 4 days, but when she didn't get a message, she contacted the authorities. That was the start of the search, even though Kenny had been missing for a whole week by then. Sharon wasn't the only one who remembered Kenny talking about disappearing. He told his brother Michael that if he ever decided to vanish, no one would find him. But Susan, who knew Kenny well, didn't believe that. Kenny had always been the positive, encouraging type. He was always there to lift people up when they were feeling down, and he had a way of turning bad situations into something hopeful. When his father passed away, Kenny had even spoken about it with Susan. The idea that he would just leave everything behind didn't seem to fit with the person he was. Internet detectives, also known as sleuths, started digging into Kenny's past to understand what might have led to his disappearance. They uncovered that Kenny's life had recently hit a rough patch. He had quit his job of 20 years, cashed out his retirement, and tried to start fresh as an inventor at the age of 47. He posted videos of his quirky inventions on YouTube, like a new kind of toilet paper holder. Despite his enthusiasm and creativity, none of his ideas ever made any money. His projects were commercial failures, and this left him in financial trouble. In fact, Kenny was so strapped for cash that he sold his house. He even made a YouTube video about it, calling it "Handsome Cowboy Sells Himself with His Home." He joked about how anyone buying the house would also get him as a caretaker. Despite his upbeat attitude, it was clear that Kenny was struggling. His inventions, his finances, and his life were all falling apart, and that left many wondering if it had all become too much for him. Kenny had a big dream. He wanted to sell his house, but still lived on the property as a caretaker. He wasn't just working for big companies anymore. He wanted to do things his way. Kenny had worked hard all his life, saving money and buying his dream house, but he wasn't ready to settle for the regular 9-to-5 grind. He had bigger plans. He wanted to create beautiful homes and sell them. However, he wasn't sure if those plans would work out. But not everyone agreed on why Kenny disappeared. Some people believed he was in debt and couldn't afford his house payments, leading him to make a tragic decision. But Susan, Kenny's friend, didn't buy that theory. She did some digging and contacted the Clark County Reporter's office. She found out that there were no liens on his property, and he didn't owe any money on it. He had even turned in a job application to a solar field company just a week before he left. So, according to Susan, there was no reason for Kenny to just walk away from everything, especially not his house. As the mystery of Kenny's disappearance grew, many online users started sharing their own theories. One Reddit user questioned if Kenny had really taken his own life. They believed it didn't make sense, especially since Kenny was always so upbeat and didn't want to hurt his family. As the internet buzzed with theories, Kenny's family also joined in on the conversation. A user who claimed to be Kenny's nephew posted a message remembering his uncle. He described Kenny as one of the best people to be around. He worked hard for everything he had and disappeared while doing what he loved. One thing that kept popping up during the search was the mysterious M Cave. This cave became a legend in its own right. The Red Rock search team even mentioned it as part of their search, but they never found it. Over the years, many hikers have set out to search for clues about what happened to Kenny or to find the elusive M Cave. Some have claimed to have found it, but no one has ever proven they discovered the real cave that Kenny had described. It's said to be shaped like a giant M, and it's located on the side of a mountain. Despite many claims, the cave remains a mystery, and the search continues. Some amateur investigators have become obsessed with finding it, but instead of answers, their efforts seem to just add to the pile of questions. Kenny had always said that he went into the cave and felt a strange vibration that scared him so much he ran away. He even planned to go back and get a gun. But Susan has her doubts about this story. She knows Kenny well, and points out that he always carried his camera with him on hikes. If he had really been scared by the cave, why didn't he take a picture or record a video of it? He dreamed of selling beautiful homes and making money doing what he loved, creating and inventing. However, not everything went according to plan. Some people believed Kenny's dreams had fallen apart. There were rumors about money problems. People said Kenny was struggling with his mortgage payments and couldn't keep up with his bills. The stress, they thought, might have pushed him to make a drastic decision. But Susan, a friend of Kenny's, wasn't buying it. She decided to look into things herself. She contacted the Clark County office to ask if Kenny's house had any debt attached to it. To her surprise, they told her there were no liens on the property. Kenny didn't owe anything on the house. This wasn't someone who was giving up, she thought. He had even applied for a new job just a week before he disappeared. He was trying to get a position at a company that installed solar panels. This didn't sound like someone who was planning to leave it all behind. Still, the mystery surrounding Kenny's disappearance grew. They didn't believe that he would suddenly end it all, especially not after all his hard work. It didn't make sense. They also pointed out that when Kenny's things were found near the mine, it didn't look like he left them there intentionally. Items like his keys and cell phone usually end up in our pockets, not just dropped and left behind. Maybe they fell out, or maybe someone had placed them there to mislead the search. Kenny's family, especially his nephew David, wasn't about to let it go. David wrote online that Kenny was one of the best people around. Kenny worked hard for everything he had, and he wasn't the type to just disappear without a reason. Sharon, Kenny's girlfriend, also got involved. She posted videos to her YouTube channel, showing happy moments with Kenny. One video even showed them hiking, laughing, and having a good time. It didn't match the idea of someone who was planning to vanish without a trace. The most interesting part of the story was the M cave. According to Kenny, there was a mysterious cave he had stumbled upon during one of his hikes. He described it as having a strange vibrating energy that scared him. He ran out of the cave, planning to return with a gun for protection. The cave became a legend. Search teams even mentioned it in their efforts to find Kenny. Over the years, many hikers set out to find the cave, hoping to discover what had happened to Kenny, or to locate the mysterious cave he had described. Some claimed to have found it, but no one could ever confirm it. The idea of the M cave kept people talking, but it only added more questions. Why didn't Kenny take any pictures or video of the cave if he was so scared by it? Sharon said Kenny always carried his camera on hikes. So why, when faced with something as strange as the M cave, didn't he take a picture? Some hikers, even when facing dangerous animals like mountain lions, are quick to pull out their phones and record. If something had happened to Kenny, why wasn't there any footage? Over the years, people kept searching, but no answers were found. Susan, however, believed Kenny wasn't as troubled as some thought. She didn't think he was in financial trouble or planning to end his life. She knew Kenny was an inventor with big ideas, even if they didn't always work out. He had plans for the future, plans to keep creating. To her, Kenny had a lot of life left to live. But the more people searched, the more they realized that Kenny's disappearance was a mystery that was far from being solved. While theories continued to flood the internet, the truth remained elusive. What happened to Kenny? Was it an accident? Or was there something more sinister at play? No one knew for sure. All they had were pieces of a puzzle, with more questions than answers. Kenny's story wasn't over, but it was a story that would never be fully understood. The search for the truth continued, and the mystery of the M cave lived on.